should advise when we're streaming on YouTube.
There you are. You're live.
Is that David? No.
We are now live.
Good evening, members. Welcome to my first ever executive as chair. Do I need to put anything on in terms of mics, or am I good? Might be helpful. Is that better? People on the screen? Yeah, okay, good. Okay, apologies for absence, please.
Thank you, Chairman. The leader has sent his apologies.
Yes, I know. He's at home, you know. Okay, minutes of the meeting held on 15th of September. Am I okay to sign those minutes? Members of the executive. I think that's enough of us to say yes, thank you. Will I sign those at the end, Rachel? Yeah. Okay, declarations of interest. Anyone on the meeting? Anyone on the exec? Take that as a no. Feel free to chirp up through the agenda if you feel the need. Questions by members. Any questions for the deputy leader or portfolio holders? Take that as a no. Okay, review of the suspension of car parking charges in rural car parks. I'll ask the portfolio holder for business and transformation to take us through that paper. Okay, so the gist of this paper is quite interesting actually, because normally we, as a owner of a car park, businesses tell us that they shouldn't be car parking charges and we should provide free parking as much as possible. This paper's come forward because some of the businesses in the rural car parks are having feedback from their customers that they can't get parked because the car parks are full of people just parking their car and leaving it there because it's a free car park at the moment. So it is an unusual position, I guess, from that respect. But the proposal is that we will reintroduce car parking charges in the rural car parks. Nonetheless, provide 2 hours free parking for the first 2 hours on all of them, Monday through Friday, and free parking at the weekend. It goes on to mention again the parking subsidy season ticket is still on offer, and we've also added, which we did in the last parking paper, you may remember, the opportunity for myself and the executive head of business to introduce parking reductions should we deem them to be appropriate. We can't introduce increases without coming back to exec, but we can introduce reductions. So, happy to take questions on the paper. Councillor Mrs. Josephine Hawkins.
Thank you, Chairman. I was actually putting my hand up because I could see that David Mansfield was having problems getting in. But I would like to just ask, I'm pleased to see this is actually coming along because I have spoken to an owner of a shop at Burrell Road on the Frimley Road, and he has said that he has had lots of problems with people actually going to his shop and not being able to get in because I think some people have just sort of parked and left their cars there. So I'm sure the shopkeepers will be very pleased to see this is coming back, and I fully support it. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? I don't see any. Okay, members, you have a recommendation on page 9 of the agenda. Are we agreed? That is unanimous. Right. By agenda item 6, the night stop. Night Stop Sleeper Initiative, Councillor Josephine Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Night Stop project was an idea that predates the COVID-19 pandemic, but is now with drive to protect and support rough sleepers and the homeless from the virus. A very timely initiative. The last rough sleeper count in September was undertaken jointly with the Hope Hub and identified 5 individuals. In addition, however, there are 13 people on the housing register of no fixed abode or are believed to be sofa surfing. The project you have before you is proposed to be delivered with a partner organisation, the Hope Hub. The proposal is also for the council to provide short-term accommodation funded as a capital project from the Affordable Housing Reserve monies. The project will be run by the Hope Hub at no revenue cost to the council. They will also be able to draw in income as rent will be payable directly from the housing benefit or universal credit. Officers will work with the Hope Hub to draw up a specification for the project, prepare the business case, prepare an agreement for the service to be provided, identify the works needed, obtain and likely providers, prepare cost estimates, and bring back a proposal to the Property and Investment Working Group and the Executive for approval funding by no later than February 21. The works will be procured thereafter. I'd like to ask the Executive to support this project. Thank you.
Councillor Bates.
Thank you, Chairman. Apologies for being a bit late. Several of us got left in the waiting room, which meant I wasn't able to declare an interest in a later item, but we'll come to that in a bit. Just on this particular item, there's 2 questions or 2 points I just want to make. First is to clarify whether, as a result of this service, which I agree is a good idea and needed, that are we going to be addressing need for those who don't actually have a statutory duty? So we were talking there about sleeping rough. Only some of those we will actually have a statutory duty to house under this legislation. So So I suppose the first question is, what, if anything, are we going to be doing with those that don't? And secondly, and it's linked to that, is on paragraph 4.4 of the report, and it's just been highlighted again by Councillor Josephine Hawkins, that this is a self-financing scheme. And it is true in principle that that's the case. However, I am slightly concerned about the fact that we are expecting the Hope Hub to be able to draw down on universal credit payments as a result of that, partly because of the report which will come later on in the agenda regarding the impact of universal credit on Surrey Heath and the numerous practical issues that there are associated with that. So whilst I agree in principle that that is the right way, can I just be reassured there will be some degree of flexibility in that, recognising that the Hope Hub won't always be able to entirely rely on universal credit payments for various reasons, including, for example, the difficult and chaotic nature of the people who are having to claim them, and that we may therefore, in exceptional circumstances, look to help them with funding if need be.
Thank you, Councillor Bates. Regarding 4.4, I know that the leader of the council, also the chief exec and Mrs. Rickard have been in discussions with the Hope Hub, so they're fully aware of what is going on. And as far as I am able to say, they are totally on board with everything. Hopefully, Mrs. Rickard is there as regarding statutory duty. Is Mrs. Rickard on this call?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I am here.
Thank you.
And I've also got Clive on the call. But in respect of people to whom we have no statutory duty, we can't help people. We're not allowed to help people who have no recourse to public funds. As a local authority, we're not allowed to help them. So that will be a matter for the Hope Hub as a charity to address that issue, I'm afraid. Because say we simply can't help them. Can I also just make the point about the future funding? As the item mentions, we have £90,000 grant from the government. So if we can use that to help pump prime the project to start with as pump priming funding to get the Hope Hub up and running. And one of the things we will have to bring with the papers when we make the decision is a paper about how the business case for this project will work. Because if it's quite clear the business case doesn't work, then the executive is going to have to think again about this project. So all of those issues will be looked at during the course of the preparatory work. Does that help, Chairman?
I think it does. Does it help, Councillor Bates? I think is the.
Yes, it does. I do, however, just want to flag that will mean that it isn't going to necessarily address fully the rough sleeping that we may have in this borough, because it has just been highlighted that those without public recourse to funds are not going to be able to use that. So we just need to make the public aware of that. But certainly I support this initiative. I do think we should be moving forward with that. And I hope that should there be a problem, and hopefully there won't be with universal credit payments, that the executive will look sympathetically at that.
Can I just add to my answer? So far as I'm aware, everyone who is rough sleeping in this borough at the moment has recourse to public funding. And several of them have been offered accommodation several times and declined it. So please be assured that certainly the people we know about, we will continue to work with the Hope Hub to assist in every way that we can.
Mr. Ginman, are you wishing to speak, sir? Or are you just playing with your pencil?
Apologies, I just needed to unmute there. As well as people with recourse to public funds, I think Councillor Bates also referring to people who are non-priority need. And this work is really important in addressing those needs, because this is additional to those statutory duties we have for single people. So those single people who are classified as vulnerable, we help now and we will continue to help. And this is additional provision for those people who fall through that gap in the legislation.
Thank you. Councillor Mulvaginam.
Thank you, Chair. On this particular study, how long would it take? I'm sorry if I missed it, my apologies. I can't see how long it's going to take, because we are walking into pretty hard times for the people in Surrey Heath in terms of homelessness and universal credit, etc. Just intrigued as to the timescale of this.
I think there's probably two answers to that question. I'll get the official answer from Mrs. Rickard or from Councillor Mrs. Hawkins.
Mrs. Rickard, please. Thank you.
As we've said, we're going to try and bring the item back to February to get the approval, because we've got to work on the business case, service level agreements, the specification for the provision itself, and that involves working with people outside of this organisation and the lead-in times for the committee. Thereafter, it's a matter of getting the necessary, once we approve the project for funding, it's a matter of getting the approvals, procuring the contractor and getting the provision provided, which we think will probably take about 6 months maximum thereafter. So I'm guessing that this project is going to take a maximum of 9 months.
And the unofficial answer is that we want to do it significantly faster than that, because we're heading into winter. And we will wait and see how we square that circle. But it has the leader's full attention. It's one of his pet projects, for want of a better term. Anyone else got questions or comments on item 6? If not, we have a recommendation on page 17 of the agenda. Can the executive please show their support or not? That is unanimous. Thank you. Okay, agenda item 7, poverty in Surrey Heath. Councillor Mrs. Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Following on from the report and update to the executive in February this year, I'm sorry to say that this project has not progressed as planned. What, of course, none of us realised at the time was the impact of COVID-19 during the lockdown from the 23rd of March and the 30th of June, and the impact this would have on our day-to-day business. Our staff were redeployed to provide welfare support, together with many elected member colleagues and others who kindly gave their time to volunteer to help. At that time, we had agreed with Mags Mercer from the Hope Hub that she would undertake some research into this. However, this was withdrawn in May due to their need to prioritise their staff to support those who are homeless. As we will all recall, the outcome for us with our successful Surrey Heath Prepared partnership ensured we provided a first-class welfare support to our local community, to all who were shielded or vulnerable. Over the past couple of months, members, volunteers, partners and staff have worked hard to bring together a revised plan which is outlined in Annex B in this agenda item. The executive is asked to support the establishment of a poverty working group, which will oversee the revised plans details within the paper. This will include appointing a chairman, agree the scope of a hardship fund from the repurposing of the underspend of the allocated budget on the 24th of March, the introduction of communication campaign to promote the services available to help during times of hardship. Last month, you will recall, we agreed to utilise the DEFRA grant received of just under 41,000 to support our main 2 local food banks, the Beetham and Woking Food Bank, as we wanted to ensure that all Surrey Heath was covered. We as a council are also committed to continue to support organisations via the Council Revenue Grant Scheme, which incidentally is open to receive applications until the 16th of November for the next financial year. And based on last year's budget, we will provide a cash injection of up to 200,000 to groups who support those most vulnerable within Surrey Heath. We will also host a community and statutory partner stakeholder event in December. And last but not least, to set up a ward councillor community fund grant scheme. Grants per se have been part of my portfolio for a number of years, and I'm aware of the importance to our community groups of this funding stream. In differentiating with the broader, I can't even say it, community fund grant scheme, this has operated in Surrey Heath for over 20 years and has provided support to countless locally based and operated not-for-profit organisations. I support the concept of being able to provide further help and assistance to our community. I see a great benefit in elected members being able to support smaller requests for funding that we often receive. I'd like to ensure that this scheme can be funded into the future, as at present this is unclear how this will be achieved post 1st April 2020. Therefore, I'd like to suggest that we link both the new ward councillor grant scheme with the existing broader community fund grant scheme so that they can sit together in the council pool of grants that we offer, and at the same time to undertake review of the existing community fund scheme to update where necessary. I appreciate the timings are short, but I'd like this brought back to the executive in February 21 for further consideration. Thank you.
Okay. Comments or questions? Councillor Bates.
Yeah, that last bit I wasn't sure I totally understood, whether you're referring the new fund for ward councillors back in February 21, or whether we would be going, or whether you intend to review the community fund grant scheme. That wasn't clear. I mean, what I can say is that the ward councillor community fund grant is something which I fully support, and I know that in discussions with other group leaders has also been similarly supported. So I do hope that isn't immediately reviewed, because I think this is a good policy and a good initiative, one which the leader himself has been very keen to establish, and I hope we can move forward and get that set up quickly. The other point I just want to make is that attached to this paper was the report from the Citizens Advice Bureau about universal credit, and I could speak for a long time about universal credit, but I won't. But what I would encourage is those of you who have perhaps closer links to our MP than me might want to point this report in his direction and flag up the procedural ways in which people are working around the system. And that's probably as much as I want to comment in public on that. But I just think it is highlighting a number of unintended issues, which I'm sure were never thought to be a problem when this was set up. The idea is a good one, but there are clearly some practical issues that need to be looked at the higher reaches of government.
Thank you, Councillor Bates. Just to, I probably confuse myself at times. It's a woman thing, I think. What I was meaning to, or I'd like to clarify, is that the COVID grant that we it was 99,000, I believe, the COVID grant which we set up originally. £55,000 of that has been allocated, so that's 44 left. As you'll see in little 4, that 10,000 of that will be going to the Citizens Advice Bureau, which means we've got 44 left. Now, this that according to this paper, there is nowhere, it doesn't say anywhere, or we haven't as yet resolved where the money will come from once we spent this 44,000. So the suggestion at the moment is we also have a community grant scheme that we bring it both back in February and look at it. Do we still need the community grant scheme? You know, how are we going to go forward? Because obviously this money in the poverty scheme will be ending. I mean, we've only got 44,000 here. So if we can combine that, so no decisions. We've only just, I chatted about it with an officer today. We can bring that back in February and have a look at all the options. Do we still need the community grants? We don't know, but I think it's just leaving all options open and have a look at it again in the new year and see where we can go from there. I hope that clarifies it a little better. Apologies.
So just for absolute clarity, the scheme, the recommendation is to introduce this scheme. All that Councillor Hawkins was discussing is, in effect, how do we refill the pot were we to spend the money relatively quickly, say, so that the scheme can continue beyond its initial funding, and which is in effect what we've what wasn't spent from the money that we agreed as a council to give to the leader and the chief executive at the start or during COVID. Councillor Garrett.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I should admit to an interest. I'm involved in ODCOG, which is on the Old Dean Community Group, and obviously that's mentioned in the report. I just wanted to highlight, I mean, when this originally came to council, I think it was poverty, food poverty was being discussed, and that's really what I want to bring up now. For the last 2 or 3 months on the Old Dean, we've been running in line with St Martin's Church, we've been running a fruit and veg store where basically the fruit and veg has been donated by allotments, and also now we're getting funding to get fruit and veg from the Emporium. And in the last couple of weeks, the requirement for people to take away free fruit and veg this week has gone through, this weekend went through the roof. We're generally there for about 2 hours, and most of the stuff that we had gone within the first half hour, 45 minutes. So my concern is that this is going to take some time to come back. In the meantime, there are going to be those residents out there that really we need to be trying to support. So I would urge, in pretty much as you were saying with the last item, we try and square the circle really quickly and try and get this sorted as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Councillor Rise.
Thank you, Chair. I just firstly, I just want to say that I fully support the recommendations, especially with regards to the poverty working group. I think that's a very good step forward for the council. But I am slightly perplexed at the solely of having councillors from Old Dean, St Michael's and Watchetts. And I appreciate that obviously that is the areas of the most deprived in the borough, but as we can all attest, while some areas of Surrey Heath may be relatively affluent, there are pockets of poverty across the borough. And I suspect that with COVID, with the onset of people losing their jobs, that the levels of poverty within Surrey Heath as a whole will increase. So I was wondering if I could suggest to the executive that rather than limiting the councillor representation on the working group to the 3 wards mentioned, that they take a more holistic approach and pull in experience and councillors from across the borough instead.
Councillor Mrs Hawkins, have you got a comment on that? I'm quite happy to.
If you want to take that, Mr Chairman, it's just that, I mean, this is only just started up. It is, we've only had one, as far as I'm aware, poverty group meeting, which I was grateful I could attend, and I will be attending future ones, but it is only just starting, and obviously the area, the councillors of the area it is at the moment, was identified as the area where the most poverty was. Of course, at the moment, we've no idea how it's going to be, how the situation is going to change with people losing jobs and COVID's still here. But Mr Chairman, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, so as the paper says somewhere else, Councillor Rise, the councillors met from Old Dean and St Michael's. In fact, I think it was just those 2 wards initially, really just to see whether or not there were any ideas that either one of the other group was working on that could be worked together. I'm quite happy that we reword that somehow to sort of say that that other councillors can be part of the working group and or can attend the working group as is possible in other working groups. There's no need to batten it down. I mean, strangely enough, and it always, surprise is the wrong word, but one always thinks of Chobham as being a really lovely place, and Chobham has, quite a significant accent housing development, and there I'm sure is poverty there, but I know that there is poverty there. Councillor Mrs. Wheeler.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, you've taken the words right out of my mouth. I also, if I remember correctly, at the meeting when this last came up, the feedback was to have the initial working group meeting, and then, depending on those findings, look to expand it out into other areas. Because I queried that last time round. I think because of the delays, I'd like to thank you for making the decision and the amendment that we will be opening it up to other areas at this stage. So thank you for that.
Can I come back there, Mr. Chairman? Councillors can input into the consultation event in December. So that, as I say, we've only had one meeting. We haven't elected a chairman. This is just starting, and I think it will grow. There will be more information, and that we will be inviting more councillors. But I think we just need to get it started at the moment and progress from there.
So I would suggest that we alter little 2 relatively simply by adding the word initially between comprised and of on the first line, and go no further than that at the moment. And I appreciate that doesn't give us a timescale as to when other councillors will be involved, but it does give an indication that that is not going to be the final state. And we can discuss that and agree that in due course. Okay, any other questions or comments on agenda item 7? If not, then we have to resolve on page 23, the 4 points with little 2 being slightly amended to add the word initially. Can I have a show of hands from the executive, please? That is unanimous. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, just before we go to the next item, I will declare an interest in item 8 because I am the safeguarding officer at St Mary's. So I have a non-pecuniary interest. So I'm going to turn my camera off for item 8.
Okay. Thank you. There is a non-pecuniary interest. Why does he have to turn his camera off?
He can stay if he wants to. That'll be fine.
Councillor Bates, if you wish to be part of this, you can. It's a non-pecuniary interest. I don't know where he's gone. He's gone. Okay. Agenda item 8, Councillor Mrs. Hawkins. It's the Mrs. Hawkins show.
Thank you very much. Can I go after this, please? As you'll see, there's a community fund grant application. We've only had one this term, this session. It is for St Mary's Church. They have asked for to refurbish its main floor hall. It's only 2,385, and I would ask the executive to resolve that this award be given.
Comments or questions? No. Okay, we have a show of hands, please. Unanimous. Thank you. Agenda item 9. Councillor Mrs. Hawkins, take a break. Councillor Mr. David Lewis.
Thank you, Chair. I'll keep this intro fairly short. I think there's going to be a debate after this one. Basically, this is a communal infrastructure levy, revised approach bidding and for distribution of funding, including updating of the regulation 123 list. As part of the changes in how the community infrastructure legacy CIL levy CIL is required to be reported, and is proposed to amend the regulation 123 list to identify a new list of strategic infrastructure funding priorities, to revise the process of bidding for CIL, funding for local projects, and allocation of that funding in the non-parish wards to the new local community improvement fund. The proposals are outlined in section 4. As a brief summary, non-parish wards to be pooled into a single fund for those areas. Priority will be given to non-parish areas experiencing development, but any unspent funding will be opened up to the other non-parish wards and schemes where Surrey Heath Borough Council is only part funder. The funding should also be opened up to bidding from community groups for capital projects such as local community improvement fund. As suggested, there are 2 bid rounds per financial year, and bids will be passed through officers before being submitted to the executive for consideration. Our options are basically to agree the recommendation or not agree the recommendation. Thank you.
Any comments or questions? Councillor Alloway.
Thank you, Chair. Could I just refer to the statement that was within item 21E of the meeting on the 21st of the July executive? In one of those statements, it says pooling seal monies whilst accepting priority for the projects within a ward where the funds had been generated. So could you confirm if the proposals now facilitate a reasonable amount of the 85% seal provided by the developers in a location will be spent on infrastructure immediately in the location, accommodating mass development? If this is the case, I am concerned it is not clearly stated to avoid any doubt. It would be good to have the item 21E statement included for clarity. I must say, any ward, including parish, that accepts a high level of development may require more than 15% to address existing poor infrastructure and benefit from the NPPF and government statements for SIL spending to bring the infrastructure up to a reasonable level in development locations to accommodate new residents. Thank you.
Councillor Lewis.
Yeah, thank you.
Mr. Hone, if you know the answer.
Yes.
Oh, indeed. Councillor Orong, Mrs. Rickard
Yes.
is keen to respond.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. But in fact, if you think about the SIL funding that we get, there are 2 pots. There's the money which goes to either the parishes or to the local wards. And in the case of the non-parished wards, that's what will go into this new sort of local community improvement fund for bids, and the 15 or the 25% that gets paid directly to the parishes. So people will be the bidding process will be for the local fund. But in addition, there's the borough fund, and that applies to the whole borough. That's not restricted to any one ward. So in respect of Councillor Allaway's question, bids from the parishes would be set against the borough-wide fund for bigger projects. So there is still the opportunity to do that, but the pooled funding is really to address the non-parish wards and pooling that funding to spread the money across towards which maybe don't take development, but whose facilities are impacted by development in adjoining wards. So it's about trying to equalise some of the development pressures across the non-parished wards. But there is still the borough-wide fund that can address the concerns that Councillor Allaway has just raised. And that's not really the subject of this paper, but people could put in bids for that fund if they wanted to. That the executive could deal with that.
Councillor Allaway, does that allay your fears, sir?
All I was seeking to understand is that with the 85% of the seal money that goes in from a location, X amount of that will be prioritised for bringing the necessary infrastructure up to a level that supports all of this new development. Whether it's whatever fund it comes from, I mean, if this borough-wide one is the one, but it's only got 10,000 quid in, that's never going to address our issues. So I just don't know how much this new fund would be, but certainly we've got some major issues, especially on safe crossings, for walking to school, and some other highway issues, but certainly there's
I think the
some
answer is
sizable costs.
You can bid for the funds that are available. The SIL funding is a formula that's worked out through the planning process, and it absolutely will not, nor will it ever, pay for all of the infrastructure requirements that the 35 councillors sat on this council would like to bid for.
I don't doubt that.
I'd go so far as to say it probably wouldn't bid for one medium-sized bit of anything. The cost of building, in particular highways and anything to do with the highways, is astronomical. Councillor Mr. Hawkins. You're on mute, Edward. Josephine, tell him he's on mute.
It's not on mute. I'm not sure why. Hold on. I'll just go tell him. Hold on. They can't hear you, Edward.
Got you, Graham.
Okay.
Councillor Tapper, you'll be next.
Sorry about that, Chairman.
There you go. You use my thing.
Everything I was saying, I was online, but I started off by saying you were doing very well, and you've had some excellent training, clearly. Mrs. Rickard made a very interesting point about wards suffering from the impact of adjoining development. Well, on that basis, I think Parkside should get everything, because we get all the traffic going to the hospital and all places like that. But I mean, the serious point is I am concerned about this. The whole concept of SIL payments is to allow residents that are taking the impact of development some further beneficial works carried out. For example, we've spent £20,000 on one play area, £10,000 on another play area. We've had £13,000 on road safety measures. But I actually feel, I know where this is coming from, but I feel it's premature that we should be looking as part and parcel of this at all the monies that loiter in the different accounts and different pots of the council. There's GOAM Trust, there's Environmental Trust, there's all sorts of pots of money lying around, which I've in the past looked at. And we've wondered where they will go. You know, I mean, there's the community fund, and there's money in the sand and gravel. Well, I don't think we have any sand and gravel pits in the borough, but I am concerned that we're working up some plans in Parkside. I don't know when we're going to get approval. I don't know when we're going to get costs. Suddenly, the money that should by right be put towards alleviating residents the impact of development has disappeared. How do we deal with that? How do we explain to the residents that we have no more money when we promised them things to be done? You know, I mean, I just think it's premature. I really would like to have seen this paper cover a lot more, look at the funds, and I would like to urge the executive to say, we hear this, we see what this paper says, why don't we take it away, defer it, and have a proper look at all the penny pots that are kicking around in the finance department? And I'm sure Councillor Lewis knows exactly what I'm talking about. If not, I have a list somewhere tucked away in the back of my files. Trust me, I know exactly where some of the bodies are buried. And we can then bring this back and look at how we can use the money that the council have got for the greater benefit. My other point, and sorry, thank you for your perseverance, Chairman, is that my belief is that this is only the non-parished borough wards, and that it is a community fund. So I don't know if this is just sort of something left wing, but let's say somebody in Bisley and West End, and I think West End have got something like £500,000 swilling around in their coffers. But somebody in West End has a community, they could apply to the non-parish kitty for money, which would then go back out to Bisley or West End, and it would be topped up via the SIL money that sits there. Now, I don't know if that's right or wrong, or if I've got the wrong end of the stick. But again, I just feel that it's a good paper, but I feel it's incomplete and more should be done. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Councillor Tapper.
Thank you, Chair. Can I have an assurance that the proposal that is being put before the exec here will not impact any bids for SIL money that have already been submitted but have yet to be decided, particularly in the case of a bid put in for a non-parish ward where the current SIL money associated with that ward is adequate to meet the needs of the bidder, but that potentially the bid could potentially be reduced or refused if all the money is combined together and that SIL money is allocated for use elsewhere.
I have 3 bids in at the moment, and it was my intention to run those through the new SIL bidding process, simply because they are all capital spend, and it would make much more sense to run those through the capital spend process. But that is clearly a decision for this meeting.
I guess the answer comes down to the quality of the application, Councillor Tapper. But I can see no reason.
Yes.
Well, no, you have been assured as best you can. I thought I was on the BBC for a moment. I thought you were going to ask for a guarantee.
No, I can't. I admit that a guarantee is probably not something that I would get, but certainly I am confident in the quality of the bid that's being made and the reasonableness of that bid as enhancing the facilities provided to the community. I just didn't want the situation where the monies might be refused because of a change that had been made to the SIL distribution requirement subsequent to the bid having originally been made.
Councillor Mulvagan.
Thank you, Chair. I personally welcome this paper because as a Frimley Green ward councillor, we actually don't have any SIL money at all. Hopefully we'll get one soon, very soon, very soon when new development start. So I do welcome this because we can utilize some of the money. And it's been on my agenda for some time, which Councillor Edward Hawkins brought up, with all the little reserves which we have within the balance sheet. That's got to be looked at very carefully, consolidated, and those monies should be made available for the residents, because this is just, if you look at it year on year, I've been in the council only for 2 years, but you could see, looking at the reserves, it's been carried year in, year out, and some of them hardly get used. I think this paper should be expanded to take that into account. Thank you, Chair.
So you can't expand the paper, but we can ask that the officers and the portfolio holder look at these alleged pots of money. I've never seen one myself, just to make that clear. Councillor Bates.
Yeah, just on these pots of money, well, there's always been an annual report on those every year. As long as I can remember being a councillor, a paper on reserves and provisions, and all of the different budgets. So I don't think there's any kind of secrecy regarding that. Obviously, it's for members to decide whether they want to spend any of those or what they want to spend them for, or change the allocations for that. So that's already there. On the issue of SIL, I think there are 2 separate issues. Firstly is the point made by Councillor Alloway, which I think is a fair one, regarding the initial 15% funding to parishes. But I believe I'm right in saying that might be a government restriction, but I may be wrong in that. But I do think that in principle, that he makes a good point regarding the first draw and whether or not that 15% could be increased. And I don't know if what the statutory requirement is on that, but I would be personally sympathetic to that. The second point, though, is regarding the unparished areas, which is what the primary focus of this paper is. And I'm going to try not to repeat the speech I've given 3 or 4 times already in this council, which is why this is necessary. But I'm going to do it anyway, because the reason is, if we take, for example, the town ward, which has a large amount of SIL money, and we compare that to Old Dean, which has 0, the residents in town ward who are adjacent to Old Dean will actually go and use the Old Dean churches, the Old Dean schools, the Old Dean roads, the Old Dean community venues, and a variety of other community services and other things like that. So whilst obviously it's right that the town community benefit as well with their facilities, it does seem ridiculous that Old Dean at the moment and other areas that have been mentioned get absolutely no opportunity whatsoever, even though they may be on the border of a development. So that's the reason why this needs to be looked at. I'm pleased it's being looked at. I think it's the right thing to be doing. And in my view, it's overdue. So I would like us to do that as quickly as possible. But the final point is I would be sympathetic to those projects which have already been submitted under the previous scheme. So although my own will benefit, I think, under this one, I wouldn't, schemes that have already been submitted and assumed to have been submitted under the previous scheme or current scheme, my view is that we should look positively on those. That would be my position.
I think we have to accept that we all use each other's roads. And if we don't accept that, then I'm going to request about £5,000 for a little toll booth on the A30. Drive to Marks and Spencer's at your cost, sir. Councillor Mrs Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually don't go along the A30 to Marks and Spencer's, if I can help it. I'd just like to comment on the Old Dean. I'm not quite sure how much the recent play area cost, but I think it was quite a substantial amount of money. So, I mean, perhaps that didn't come through SIL, but that did come via another avenue. I think this paper, I think we are rushing it too much. I think we need to go back and look at all the options of different ways to do things. And for that reason, I'm not able to support this, but thank you.
Okay, any other comments or questions? I am able to support this. Members of the executive, please show approval or not, please. Okay, that's Councillor Page, Lewis, Mansfield and Dugan, and against Councillor Mrs Hawkins. Thank you. Agenda item 10, statement of community involvement. Councillor Page.
Thank you, Chairman. Can you hear me? That's fantastic. So this is something that we've got to do by law. So the statement of community involvement sets out how the council will involve the community and stakeholders in the preparation of the Surrey Heath local plan and in the determination of planning applications generally. It's in response to changes to the regulations we revised and consulted on updates to this statement in November and December 2019. It follows that further changes to the regulations were made to reflect social distancing measures in response to COVID-19, and the draft statement was reviewed and updated to reflect these further changes. In addition, a further targeted consultation took place in June and July 2020, and these all feed back to the local plan, which various colleagues and members sit on. The report before you outlines the proposed changes to the draft statement to take account of comments made in responding to these consultations. It's important to stress that the statement sets out the minimum consultation we will undertake to comply with statutory requirements, and that we are able to undertake more extensive consultation at any stage. Therefore, to sit alongside the statement, a more detailed and specific consultation strategy for the local plan will be developed ahead of each stage of the public consultation. The statement that we have is recommended for adoption, and I commend it to this council.
Any comments or questions? Councillor Bates.
Just one quick one, which was, I think there was a submission from, it might have been Shrubham Parish Council, yes it was, who commented that the topics of appeals and enforcement do not appear to be covered in the document, and there's an officer response about that. And whilst I would agree that we don't necessarily need to change this document, I do think that is a point that we do need to look at. I know, for example, the planning enforcement policy is going to be coming in due course to this council. So perhaps that could be looked at within that. But we do need to have a clear mechanism regarding the ways or not that public can be involved in those particular areas, because it's clearly an area of contention and an area that I think we'd all benefit from more clarity around.
Okay, you were recommending that came back as part of?
So there's a comment about appeals and enforcement. Well, there's an enforcement enforcement policy, which I understand is in the process of being revised and will come back to an executive in due course. And in terms of appeals, I think the governance working group are going to be looking at that anyway. So, but it's really to flag up that there is a need to consider this issue of community involvement at appeals and in enforcement, although I appreciate that there is also, it has to be balanced with the need to ensure proper statutory processes are followed.
There's a paper coming in the next exec. Mrs. Rickard will comment.
Yes, Chairman. The local enforcement plan, which was circulated to all of you for comment the other week, is coming back to November executive for hopefully approval, taking on board the comments that we've received wherever possible, and we will respond to the comments that we've received. In terms of community engagement in enforcement action, I think that's a little bit of a tricky one, but certainly we are looking at how we can make sure that councillors are better involved. And in terms of the other issues, such as appeals, yes, you're taking that to governance working group.
Okay, any more comments or questions? No. So, members of the executive, agenda item 10, you have a recommendation on page 81. I have a show of hands, please, to support that paper. That is unanimous, thank you. Agenda item 11, Councillor Page.
So this follows the theme, but this is all about the planning for the future white paper. So this paper sets out the fundamental changes to the planning system, and one of the most significant changes proposed is the adoption of a top-down binding housing target, and thereby hangs a tail. So this uses a mathematical calculation for future growth rather than a fuller assessment of planning constraints and opportunities. Another significant proposal is the identification of land under one of three categories. So it's important to understand that there are areas of growth to be identified, which are sites with substantial development opportunity, which would be granted outline consent on adoption of the local plan. There will be renewal sites. So this is land where there is a presumption in favour of development, or protection areas where development would be restricted. And I'm probably thinking green belt or similar. The proposals seek to streamline and shorten the local plan process, putting generic development management policies in national planning policy so that the local plans focus on the site-specific matters. The changes place greater focus on getting site-specific matters resolved in local plans with faster and more limited planning application requirements. So the white paper also sets out proposals to simplify and streamline the development management process, giving greater automatic permissions in principle and permitted development rights. So it's going to make life easier in certain smaller developments, I think. A key proposed objective is to give greater priority to design and require the production of a design guidance and design code, so to make Britain more beautiful. The proposals would also replace Section 106 agreements and the community infrastructure levy. So what we've talked about previously tonight might go by the wayside. Who knows? The delivery of the proposals will be supported by digitisation of the planning process. So there's going to be much more IT involved. The report highlights a number of concerns. So our report highlights a number of concerns, including the impact of the proposals on reducing public involvement and limiting local influence. In particular, it is relevant to highlight that whilst the consultation outlines the broad principles of the changes proposed, it raises a number of detailed implementation questions, which we consider remain unanswered. So our officers have done a lot of work looking at the proposals, and no broad brush fits all, we think. So at Appendix 1 to the report, we've set out a detailed response to the government's proposals, and I hope you have all had the opportunity to read that. So there are some things in there which raise eyebrows and question marks. We are a borough which is heavily constrained by the Thames Basin Heath. We are heavily constrained by sites of special scientific interest, and we are the most treed borough in the land. So there are some implications with what is coming in the white paper. Hopefully we've managed to address those in the consultation, Appendix 1, and that is what I'm asking the executive to approve. It's our responses to that to government. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Page. Any comments or questions? Ms. Councillor Fitzgerald, were you wafting something away, or Councillor Mansfield?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Whilst I certainly will be proposing to voting on behalf of this in agreement, but I just raised the point that quite rightly Councillor Page mentions, that it's my concern about the limiting of local involvement, and I'm really pleased to see on the actual response from the council, which is referred to as in Appendix 1, Councillor Page pointed out on page 155, third column from the bottom of the page, where it says that despite references in the white paper to increasing community involvement, the council considers that the proposals may actually deliver fewer opportunities for the community to have a say on the type of location or development in their area. So I'm glad that's been raised, and I think it's something we should certainly keep a very strong eye on, because I'm not suggesting for one moment that central government wishes to do things under the radar, but this is certainly something that I will be keeping a very close. And I thank Councillor Page as the portfolio holder, and also the work of the officers for really concentrating on that point, because that's a vital point. And all those future councillors that are going to be in this far longer than I'm going to be, stick to page 155 and keep an eye on that one. Thank you.
Mrs. Dawkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If Edward can speak, for some reason he's got Zoom problems. Hold on just 1 second. Apologies.
Thank you, Chairman. I've actually been muted, or can't unmute myself. Two very quick points. I can't recall seeing it in the response, but one thing we did discuss was that it was, the whole paper is laden, one would almost say anti-council. It is criticising councils, it's putting undue pressures on councils. There's no adequate funding or financing for councils, certainly for fast tracking the draft local plans and things like that. But there is nothing there that tells the developers that they've just got to get on. They can't sit on land. And I would like to have, rather than the 3 years that developers often have to get on site, and to have a proper measure, not one that they could just go and start and dig a hole and then say we've started on site, to have meaningful development, to stop developers land hoarding. The other point I was going to make, we discussed this at Surrey County Council today when we're talking about the infrastructure elements, and this will hopefully music to Councillor Allaway's ears, that County are putting in a robust comment regarding the lack of funding and the lack of controls that County will have on building proper infrastructure. Again, going back to Councillor Page's comments about the nature of the landscape in which we live, I can think of a number of areas where whether the money's there or not, it is just not physically possible to improve, widen the road surface, widen the road area, things like that. The hospital needs a greater concentration of buildings, possibly go higher, but it's not feasible given where the hospital is. We all accept it's in the wrong location, but that's with the enormous benefit of hindsight. But really, Chairman, I wanted to make that point about my personal beef on developers not being forced to get on and carry out meaningful development, and it is a very personal beef of mine. And just to let everybody know that county are very much on the case in terms of infrastructure. Thank you, Chairman.
Say anything about the developers? I have to say I agree with them.
I mean, it's something we can add onto our response. I'm looking at Jane because I had a feeling we put that in the response to the last paper that we sent. The Jane's on Zoom, but I haven't got the previous response in front of me.
We have picked up on that point, and we do reference it in response to question 14 in the report appendices, but I'm happy to strengthen that wording a little bit further.
Yeah, a good point. Thank you for drawing our attention to that. It does say that. I mean, I'm personally happy with the wording, but if we can strengthen it before we send it in, then I would support Councillor Hawkins's thoughts on that. It is annoying when you give planning permission and sit for 5 years and nothing happens. Okay, any other comments or questions? Councillor Bates.
Thank you, Chairman. I do agree with what other colleagues have said about this. I think there are a lot of issues around here that are not sufficiently detailed in terms of the white paper, and I think the officer response is good actually on this one. The 2 points that are particularly concerning to me are regarding the lack of detail on neighbourhood plans. I know they're saying that they're going to be accepted, but to not have any meaningful detail around that is very poor, because clearly the community have designated that and the councils have designated those. So there does need to be more information from the government on that. I'm particularly concerned around the whole issues of local democracy, and I'm glad to see that within our own response that we're making clear that even in growth areas that we would not just expect there to be, in effect, high-speed planning applications to go in with little or no democratic or local input into them. That needs to be absolutely crucial. I would have one area where I might personally differ with what the officers have said, which is regarding the where you say under section 7B, the council would support the abolition of the duty to cooperate as it is set out at present. And I have a lot of sympathy with the practical points that are then made, but I'm not sure I personally would support the abolition of it in its entirety, because ultimately there is a need to work with other councils about housing allocations, particularly for us. So whilst I think the points that are made are fair enough, I'm not aware we have actually got a policy of supporting the abolition of the duty to cooperate, and it's one I would be reluctant to put in a paper to that effect, but that's obviously an executive decision. And the final point I just wanted to make is I would actually suggest a further little V in your recommendation, which is that the leader or the deputy leader, who's obviously chairing tonight's meeting, consider sending a copy of the council's response to our MP and to the minister responsible, so they are aware of our concerns on the proposal. Because ultimately, if it just goes to civil servants in a unit, the points are not necessarily going to get the outing that they are. And it doesn't matter what political colours people are. Our local MP is there to be made aware of particular points and concerns of our council on this. And I think he should be made aware of it formally.
Okay, can I ask the officers to comment on the comment around the local plan? I think we've covered democratic input. It's covered on that first letter that, in fact, Councillor Mansfield read out, and also on the duty to cooperate. I don't know, Jane or Mrs. Reeves, please.
Thank you. In terms of the duty to cooperate, the requirements for undertaking that have changed through changes to the National Planning Policy Framework guidance, and the duties are now quite onerous in terms of statements of common ground that we have to enter into with all the local planning authorities. So I completely agree, we do need to cooperate with our neighbouring authorities, and we do need to work together, particularly around the delivery of infrastructure. I think our concern is with the precise, detailed nature of the mechanisms in place at the moment under the duty to cooperate are rather onerous, and a different alternative way of working together could well be better. So that's with reference to those that specific point on the duty to cooperate. In terms of the neighbourhood plans, it's completely accurate to say there is very limited information in the Planning for the Future white paper. It suggests that neighbourhood plans could perhaps be more focused on design requirements moving forwards. But to be honest, as with a lot of other aspects of the white paper, there's not much detail within it to explain the future function of neighbourhood plans beyond that.
Do you feel that we've commented sufficiently on the local plan element, Mrs. Reeves?
On the, do you mean on the neighbourhood plan?
The lack of anything to do with the local plan in the white paper, and thus our response.
Happy to add something further in around neighbourhood planning.
I mean, I'm not asking you necessarily, as long as you're comfortable that we've covered it off appropriately within our response, then I'm okay with it. It's just whether or not having it sort of brought back to you as a, can we strengthen our disappointment that there is very little about the local plan in the white paper? Should we comment on it further?
I'm happy to look at that and add in some strengthened wording in consultation with the portfolio holder.
Thank you. Okay, anyone else? Councillor Bates.
Sorry, yeah, just under that duty to cooperate, can I therefore suggest, because I think we're of a similar mind and it's just the wording, but I would suggest that instead of using the word abolition, that you use the word revision. And I think that would then cover the points that we jointly agree, because we're not looking to abolish the purpose of consulting with councils. It's the onerous nature of it that we're concerned about.
Yes, please.
I'm happy to amend that if that's what executive would like me to do.
I can see no problem with that revision statement.
Thank you, Councillor Page. Then if we can make that amendment, add a piece about the local plan, strengthen the words on telling developers to get on with it. I'm more than happy that we add a little 5 perhaps in the recommendation to ask the leader to send a letter to the local MP. So, no more comments and questions. Members of the executive, you have a recommendation on page 146 of the agenda paper pack, amended with a new little 5. Can I have your support for the paper, please? That is unanimous. Thank you very much. Oops. Right. Agenda. Oh no, I've missed one. Agenda item 12, wherever it's gone. There it is. Okay. Agenda item 12. Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Chairman. It's another SIL one, but hopefully not quite as controversial as the last. This is an item about putting in ducting for the installation of fibre and cabling in the High Street and Princess Way East in order to support the upgrade of CCTV and internet, including 5G. It should avoid future need to excavate the High Street when these systems are updated. The work is currently underway and the thing is currently excavated, so the only extra cost is the purchase and installation of this ducting. We're being asked to recommend that a capital bid of £150,000 for the funding of works to provide new ducting for CCTV and internet cabling in Canby Town Centre as part of the current Public Realm project be agreed. Thank you.
Any comments or questions? Councillor Tapper.
Thank you, Chair. I'm delighted to hear that forethought has been given to the inclusion of ducting into the current works that are being carried out in the town centre. Whether it's funded or partly funded out of silver funds accumulated by Town Board is really neither here nor there. What I think we should remember, of course, is that what we are doing here, if, as I understand it to be, reading this, the intention is that any internet provider wanting to provide cabling to their customers in that area of the town would be required to use the council's pre-provided ducting. This will save them an awful lot of money in digging up the roads and inserting their own ducting. I'd like some sort of assurance that when those internet providers use those ducts for their own cabling, that they will be charged an amount of money back into SIL money or whatever funds will be available to the community to represent the savings that they've made in all of the infrastructure works that they would otherwise have to carry out themselves. Thank you, Chair.
Oddly enough, I think the answer to that is that you find it very difficult to insist with some of the infrastructure providers that they have to do that. They have rights that we will not undo as a borough council. But yes, we will try and encourage anyone to use, in fact, our fibre rather than even use our ducts as best as possible. Councillor Perry. Sorry, I should have come to you first, given you're the Town Ward Councillor. My apologies.
No, thank you, Chairman. Obviously, it makes sense to do this work at this stage now rather than dig up our brand new high street and what have you. I have to say my first reaction to this was that I was surprised and disappointed that we had not envisaged this requirement and built it into the capital plans that we've just for the high street and the square works that we've just carried out or in the middle of carrying out. Anyway, we are where we are, so I've supported the use of SIL money for it. Many of our constituents live in the centre or close by and work there, and I believe this facility, improving the facilities as far as internet and 5G are concerned, will help the town centre differentiate itself and hopefully will add to its the speed of regeneration that we're all trying to encourage. So that's why I've supported the use of our SIL money for this purpose. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Perry. Councillor Mulvaginam.
Thank you, Chair. What Councillor Tapper raised earlier is a valid point. I mean, I'm sure it's going to be difficult sort of to get the providers to contribute. Just a thought for the officers and the exec to think about. We provide them with the ducts, but don't provide them with the cables, because the cables over a period of time are going to change. Technology changes, cable changes. So anyone who wants to put a cable, let them put it laid down themselves. So we don't have to incur the cost of a cable at this particular moment in time. The internet provider provides the cables and they can charge their customers. It's just a thought for the exec.
I'm happy that we support whatever works without digging up any of the high street again. Councillor Hawkins.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, look at that.
Oh,
the appliance of science.
Technology has improved. No, I didn't get the grandson to do it. Woohoo! Did I hear you right? You said that we can't insist on a provider using our ducting. Can I, if you could answer that, please, and I'll come back, please.
I don't believe we can. I can be wrong. I don't know whether anyone else wishes to comment. My understanding, as part of the telecommunications industry, is they have astonishing powers.
Right.
Well, the high street is adopted highway, so ultimately it would be down to Surrey County Council. But the purpose of putting the ducting in now is to future-proof it for the upgrade of the CCTV, so that they don't have to dig up the high street, and that is, of course, our own project. And additional ducting so that as and when an upgrade to the internet, such as 5G, finally occurs, the fibre can be blown along the ducting. And clearly, if it was our 5G project, then there may be the potential to do cost recovery, but we can't, if anyone else uses it, we can't necessarily stop them, and we can't charge them, my understanding. And if there was a charge, I suspect that might be for Surrey County Council's Highway Authority, because bear in mind, this project has been part funded by other public monies.
Yeah, my point was more the fact that a internet provider, lovely people they are, wouldn't be forced to use our ducting. And if that is the case, I will take that up with the cabinet member at county and put that on, because we're progressing on lane rental. And that strikes me as something that could well be put in as well, or added to that, the principle of lane rental, which has got a lot of people squealing because they don't like the concept, and you can guess the type of people that are objecting to it. But
Right. Councillor Tapper's point is
Thank you, Chairman.
at the end of the day, the telecoms companies don't want to throw money away. And if the ducting is there to be used and it's easy and we're providing access, then it would be somewhat foolish to employ civil works to do it instead. But I'm sure we will use every effort we can to ensure that our ducting is used so that we don't dig up the high street. Any other comments or questions? No. Okay, so members of the executive, you have a recommendation on page 171, not amended. Can I have a show of support, please? That is unanimous. Thank you. Right, I've been advised by the powers that be that we need to take a screen break, ladies and gentlemen. Chief Executive, what are the rules around screen breaks? 20 past. What have you got as the time just now? Okay, 5 minutes. I'm told that we have us back at 20 past. Oh, it's gone already. Put the screen up. Yeah.
You do need a screen break, actually. So if you've been zooming all day.
Yeah. Are we on? Can you hear us, members? Brilliant. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. Agenda item 13, the Kevin Cantillon Fund repurposing. So some of you members may remember we brought this back, or I brought this back a number of months ago, really trying to provide another purpose for the fund that was set up in Kevin Cantillon's memory. The shop front has had limited success, I think would be my description. And we had some, I think, at the time, some very good ideas as to how we could help businesses in the post-COVID environment. I guess what transpired was simply the need of those businesses to move phenomenally quickly to be able to open the minute the government said they could. Sat next to a council process of funding which requires 3 quotes and nothing to have been spent up front. So it, unfortunately, although I thought it was a great idea at the time, it really didn't work for businesses. So this paper sets out a different idea, and perhaps with some more information of what the impact of COVID is looking like across the borough. And it sets out at paragraph 1.10 4 initiatives that we're proposing to fund to help with, in effect, really two particular areas. One is young people, who are one of the cohorts that we have seen a significant increase in UC claims. And the other one, again, which is, it's just an interesting statistic, but a number of the people claiming UC now in Surrey Heath are small business owners. They just haven't been able to bring their business back to life in the continued restrictions, and and they are struggling. So again, there are some business clinics, one-to-one health checks and the like. So you can see the 4 projects that we're proposing to fund, and it also makes it a little 1.10 little 5 to other schemes that we continue to will support. So Kickstarter is the national scheme the government's brought out, led by the DWP, but also very importantly, we'll continue with Camberley Job Club, which I think will have more customers than it's ever had, unfortunately. So I hope that this will be a success on the various projects that we're proposing. And that we will, I mean, it's not a case of trying to spend willy-nilly the fund that we put aside, but it would be nice that something positive comes out of this funding. Any comments or questions? Councillor Perry.
Thank you, Chairman. When this was first discussed, it was suggested that it would be a good idea to just widen the scope of help that could be given to existing businesses. All these initiatives seem to be very basic and startup and what have you. You're not really supporting existing businesses very much. And we suggested they could, if they came out with a good marketing campaign, or they wanted to build a website, that sort of thing, we could go 50-50 funding on that sort of thing, which would be more likely to get an immediate effect with an existing business. So I don't see any sign of that in this list of suggestions at all.
I guess there's a limit to what we can do. The economic development team are a team of 2. Most of what we're proposing here is stuff that we will facilitate rather than run and operate. I'm quite happy that we look at that, Councillor Perry, in the future, but it's not something that we have on the table this evening. But I am happy to take that away and ask economic development through Mrs. Livingston to look at. Do you want to comment, Mrs. Livingston?
Just to come in really, if that's okay, Chair. I suppose the scheme around the Enterprise Business South is open to existing businesses as well, Councillor Perry. I take your point about maybe being more specific with what support we give, but that is about businesses that do already exist, and it's how we help them. But very happy to look at more any practical ideas, because obviously it is about getting out there and making sure that we're giving that assistance.
Councillor Tapper.
Thank you, Chair. I must admit that the original intention of this this fund was admirable, and we had hoped to have made some substantial use of this to improve Heatherside Arcade, which God knows was desperately in need of it. Unfortunately, the way that the fund was set up fell for one very important reason, and that is that the majority of the retail units are owned by landlords. And in the case of Heatherside, absentee landlords largely, absentee to the extent that one particular landlord actually lives in South Africa. And all they're interested in doing is drawing down the maximum amount of rent out of their tenants and spending as little as possible as they can on the retail unit themselves. So the requirement for a 50% contribution, if it was to be realised for the beautification of the landlord's property, would have to have been met by the tenants out of their own pocket and out of the money they made from their business. And consequently, you can understand that that is an issue which is causing severe problems to the tenants, especially in the current economic climate. So I'm wondering whether some thought could be given to this to include this still as something that the fund could meet, but that may be a smaller requirement to contribute towards the cost could be allowed if the contributor is the tenant and not the landlord of the property.
I'd imagine, Councillor Tapper, that's the case in very many situations. I mean, at the end of the day, if you look at the shopping centre in Camberley Town Centre, Sainsbury's are the tenant. We haven't paid them a penny to put the Sainsbury's sign up. This was very much aimed at local and small businesses, and the 50-50 piece was something that we looked at. I don't, in all honesty, I don't really see a need to try and loosen that. There is still money in the shopfront improvement scheme, and we believe there'll be one or two more schemes to come forward. I'm quite happy that we get as many as there are to use up the funds that we've kept aside for that, but it would be on the basis of the funding requirements that we've had so far. Of the requirements that have come forward, I think 8 out of 9 have been approved. My memory serves me right. Councillor Perry.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I think one of the problems here is that new shop front is not the top priority for many people in struggling businesses. They've got to get more customers in. They'll do that by marketing, creating a website, doing all that sort of stuff. That's what you do if you fight to get customers in. Don't put a new shop front in. So, you know, we're solving a problem they haven't really got. Why don't we just widen the scope so that anybody that's got a reasonable business case and a proposition, let's help them by supporting them on a 50-50 basis or whatever basis you want to do it. We're just limiting it shop front only. Why are we being so restrictive?
I can answer your point for a second time, Councillor Perry. I will ask the Economic Development team to do what you asked first time, which is the same as what you've asked second time, and we will look into that going forward. Any other comments or questions? Okay, members of the executive, you have a recommendation on page 173 of the papers. Can I have a show of support, please? That is unanimous. Thank you. Right, now for a ripper paper. Agenda item 14, Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Chair. For the Executive, we have the annual report on the Treasury Management Service and actual prudential indicators for 2019-2020. There's been a lot of work put into producing this report, so it feels a little wrong to pass it off with a couple of sentences. But I've no doubt the Executive have read the report and noted that we have indeed complied with the prudential indicators as agreed at the Executive meeting of the 19th of February 2019. Recommendation is we resolve to note the report on Treasury Management, including compliance with the 2019-2020 prudential indicators. We have the option to endorse, amend, note or reject the recommendation, and the proposal is that we note the report.
Okay, members, any questions or comments? I was going to almost come to you immediately, Councillor Mulvagan, without even asking, but Councillor Mulvagan, please.
Thank you, Chair. Only comment I have, I mean, this is a report, historical report as of 31st of March 2020. We are in October now. I think exec should seriously consider preparing a report like this every quarter so that the other councillors can have a look at the way we have borrowed and invested and earned or not earned money and whether we have complied with the prudential indicators. It's just a suggestion for the officers and for the exec to think about. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mulvagan. Anyone else? No. Members of the executive, you have recommendation on page 4, wrong, at item 14 on page 195. Have a show of support, please. That is unanimous, thank you. Right, there's a slight change to the running order now because item 15 needs to go into part 2, and I will explain why when we get there. So we'll now do item 16. Do I have to read this out? Okay. The executive is advised to resolve that under Regulation 4 of the Local Authorities Executive Arrangements, Meetings and Access to Information, England Regulations 2012, the publicly excluded from the meeting for the following items of business on the ground that they involve the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraphs of Part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Act as set out below.